Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I'll be doing my winner rankings for all of North American Big Brother. So essentially Big Brother US, Big Brother Canada, plus also the US spin-off seasons. Now this has been a long time coming. I did do a season ranking in a similar style a way back, and just for some reason I never got around to winner ranking until now, so let's do it. So I've obviously done my winner ranking for Big Brother Canada and Big Brother US separately. So what this video will essentially do is merge those two lists into one. Now I did do a pretty long debate over whether or not to include the winners of Celebrity Big Brother and Big Brother OTT. What I ended up coming down to was I am including the winners of Celebrity Big Brother. Now the reason why I didn't want to initially was because it's just such a radically different game. It's obviously a much shorter game. It's a game where people get to go home and then vote based off of what they see on the show, which, I mean, to be fair, BB2 is included on this list and they get to do the same thing there. But the reason why I did ultimately decide to keep them on the list here is because I kind of set a precedent with Australian Survivor, because I will eventually be doing a Survivor global ranking and international ranking and all this stuff. And really, Australian Survivor is fundamentally a different game from normal Survivor as well, with it being longer. But I'm still going to be including those winners in the overall list. So I feel like with Big Brother here, with Celebrity Big Brother, it's kind of the same thing, just in the opposite way, where it's shorter, but still fundamentally, there isn't enough there to rank. However, I did decide to not put the winner of BBOTT on the list, and now that we're here, we might as well just talk about it. Both Eddie and Morgan are not on the list. Eddie, the winner of BB1, that was fundamentally a completely different game. And while Celebrity Big Brother is normal Big Brother, but just on a shorter time span, Big Brother 1 was just a completely different game. I mean, it is what Big Brother was supposed to be, but it is different from what the majority of North American Big Brother is at this point, where the public votes people out, the public votes for a winner. That's not what Big Brother is anymore. So because that, Eddie just, it didn't make sense to put him on. And Morgan was a big debate, because the thing about Morgan is the game is played in a way that is similar to North American Big Brother. Mind you, I mean, there's a lot of twists in BBOTT. I mean, so many to the point where it greatly affected the game as a whole. And even that alone is already kind of making it very rocky on how to include Morgan onto the list. But with the fact that also America chose the winner, it made it near impossible. I mean, like, at that point, I just don't feel comfortable putting her on the list. But we can talk about Morgan here, because Morgan, again, at the end of the day, I mean, BBOTT, at least for parts of it, were just like the original Big Brother. So, I mean, Morgan would be a low-ranked winner for me if she had one due to traditional means. I mean, mind you, I do think Morgan wins a jury vote. I think it's very, very close. It's probably, really, it's either a tie or Justin breaks the tie. She was someone that was fundamentally within the majority alliance. I mean, at the beginning of the game, the majority alliance that came together, she was part of that. The problem is that, again, this was a season with so many twists, where America got a vote to vote people out. They were giving care packages every single week, and this just really ruined her majority and made it so that her allies were being taken out one by one by one. Now she loses a lot of her allies because of these twists, but also because all of her allies were gone, she was able to win out and get to the end in a sort of an underdog position that I do think greatly benefited her chances of winning the game. Because I think if the game had played out naturally, where that majority did keep the numbers for at least a good chunk of time, I don't think we see Morgan as the winner. She wasn't really a active player for most of the season. So if I were to put her onto the actual ranking, she would be a bottom tier winner. But I do think in a general Big Brother season, I don't think Morgan is a bad player. I think she's kind of that Jordan Lloyd sort of mold, where I just don't see anyone going after her for a good chunk of time. I do think she's more strategically savvy than a Jordan Lloyd, to where if she were to get to the end of the game, I do think she has more agency in getting her win. But just in terms of her winning game, not super impressive. But now let's get into the actual list itself. There are 29 winners to rank here. We won't be going through every single one in great detail. Again, I already did that in my winner ranking for US and Big Brother Canada. If you want to see me go more in depth on these players, watch those videos. However, there are some placements that have changed over time, and there are some winners that weren't on the list in those previous videos, and because of that, those winners will get more of a focus when talking about players here, but I will still talk about everyone. So let's start off with number 29, At 29, from Big Brother Canada, Season 1, we have Jillian. And this is the thing about Jillian. I mean, Jillian would have been a middle tier winner if she didn't accidentally win the game. I mean, she literally loses the game, but a technicality and Topaz being an idiot and putting the wrong card into the key box, like, I mean, that's really the thing that gives Jillian the win. I mean, essentially, like, her being so upset at Jillian made Topaz not pay attention to who she was voting for, and that gives Jillian the win. I mean, it's so luck-based that I really can't put her any higher. Like, under normal circumstances, she loses a jury vote against literally every single person on the cast. Again, her positioning is that of a middle-tier winner. She was someone that was in the majority for a good chunk of the game and was the second command to the person that ran the game. But at the same time, she has so many flaws in her jury management and did need to win out at points. So for me, I never looked at her as that great of a winner. Now moving on to number 28, and we're kind of in this tier of winners that were benefited by twist. So at 28 here from the US, we have Evil Dick. And I mean, I've already talked about Evil Dick. I think Evil Dick's one of the luckiest players in the history of Big Brother. I mean, he enters the game with a daughter that he tried to get on the show with already in BB6. He gets blatantly saved by production at the final 9, where Eric is forced to save him due to being America's player. And there are multiple times throughout the season where Eric isn't able to target Dick because he's America's player. Dick completely isolates a good chunk of that jury to the point where no one wanted to vote for him outside of the scenario where he was against Danielle. And even in that scenario, he needed the help of Eric to convince some of the people on the jury that he was the better option there. Evil Dick's game sucks. Again, for me, I don't look at Evil Dick as that great of a winner. He's here at number 28. At number 27, we have the first celebrity Big Brother winner. We have Marissa. I think she's another one of the luckiest winners in the history of Big Brother. There were points where she did technically have control. Again, she was another one that was the second command to Ross. Ross is someone that controlled the game. She did make decisions with Ross at points, but I think towards the second half of the game, which, mind you, again, this is only not even a month-long game, she completely loses control and she doesn't really do anything actively. Like, Ross just plays circles around her at that point, where Ross is planning on taking her out in that end game because he knows that he can't beat her, and he was correct in that assessment. I think Marissa was very much benefited by the fact that this was a celebrity season, a season that wanted to give to win to someone that was a bit more honorable, someone that played deceptively, and obviously Marissa played less deceptively than Ross. I think also the fact that this was an older cast really benefited her as she was a parent. But again, she's also another one that's benefited by the twist at the Final Four, where the Final Four twist is the person at Final Four gets to vote out 2 people and pick who they want to go to the final 2 with, which is just a ridiculous amount of power, especially for Marissa. And even then, she kind of lucks her way into a winning scenario, where she obviously had a final 2 of Ross the entire way through and takes Ross to the end, but she thinks she's losing to Ross. Like, she even says that in the moment, that she thinks she's gonna lose to Ross, but she's gonna take Ross. And again, that's the worst part of it, is that she thinks she's losing. She's actively taking the person that she thinks she will lose to, but then just ends up happening to win because she completely misread the jury. She completely misread the entire game, where she also thought Ross was going to take her to the end when Ross was really going to take Mark McGrath to the end. I think Marissa does almost everything wrong in the back half of this season, but it just ends up working out for her. So for me, she lands here at number 27. At number 26, we have another BBUS winner, and I really debate on putting this one higher, but I kind of went against it, and that is Jordan Lloyd. I think Jordan is a better player than a couple of the winners we'll be talking about later. I think Jordan is a very consistent player. I think the problem for Jordan is that she has no agency in the game, and when it comes to my winner rankings here, that plays a major part in it. I think she's also someone that was benefited by the coup d'etat, where that greatly benefited her position in the game. Jordan is someone that is always going to do well on almost every single season, but her winning game lacked agency and was also benefited by twists, so she lands here at number 26. At number 25, we have another winner very much benefited by a twist, and that is Rachel Riley. Rachel Riley from BB13. Again, obviously in that season, she had the Pandora's box, which made it at the final 6. She is able to save herself and Jordan. I've talked about this in my winner ranking, where I do think Rachel still has a chance of winning the game, even if that doesn't happen. I don't think that's a complete death sentence for her, but it definitely benefited her positioning, like 1,000,000,000%. And considering that she's not even that great of a player outside of that, I mean, she played the first half of the game pretty poorly. But again, I do think she had more strategic agency than Jordan, and that's the only reason I have her higher than Jordan, even though, again, I think Jordan is an overall better player. Now, number 24, we have from Big Brother Canada, we have from BBCAN 3, we have Sarah. And I know some people were surprised I had Sarah so low. The thing about Sarah is that, again, she's another one of these players that, kind of like Evil Dick, where I think they give off this illusion of them being a really good player. And I think Sarah is a better player than Evil Dick. But when you actually analyze their game, it's massively flawed. I think Sarah makes the wrong decision for her game at almost every single opportunity. And she also gets benefited from a whole bunch of twists as well. I mean, there's so many. I mean, the Brittany being saved by that have not power, that really helped Sarah with her positioning, obviously keeping Brittany, her closest ally, around. We had Cindy coming back from the pre-jury with the information of, hey, you should work with Sarah. And even then, Sarah misplays that round. I think her getting rid of JP was just terrible for her. I mean, JP was one of the few people on the other side that was actually willing to work with her. So the fact that she votes out JP, I think, is a complete misstep for her. Going back to that have not power, I think her getting rid of Bruno at that point was a very personal move. Kept in a 3-person alliance at the final 6 over a guy that, again, she didn't like, a guy that would have targeted her, but all of them were targeting her. So it is more beneficial to get rid of the 3-person alliance. The triple eviction was another thing that should have greatly benefited her. Brittany won the power, one of the most powerful positions you can be in the history of Big Brother, where you can eliminate 2 targets at once. And even then she messes it up, where Sarah ends up accidentally voting out one of her closest allies in Willow. But overall, for me, Sarah played a very luck-dependent game. So while she was a good social player, she was never able to actually use those social bonds to really benefit her game, and was helped out by twists. So for me, she lands here at number 24. So now we're out of the tier of winners that were greatly benefited by twists. Now we're into the tier of people that won out, people that won challenges to get to the end. And here at number 23, we have Nick and Phil from Big Brother Canada 4. And I think if we're ranking the winners as players, Nick and Phil are towards the bottom, especially Phil. I think Phil is one of the worst players to ever win the game. But if we look at their winning game, they weren't that badly positioned for the first 2/3 of it. They were one of the members of that middle group that was controlling the game very early on. Now, they do eventually become the targets towards the end game. But up until the final 8, I do think they played an alright game. At the final 8, though, their game kind of gets into a big mess. And that starts to make them a target coming into the next week, where Cassandra directly goes after them. They're able to save themselves with the veto. And from that point on, they pretty much win out. They win HOH or veto almost every round, or at least them or Kelsey. And that's really what gets them to the end at that point, despite them, again, playing pretty poorly from that point forward. I mean, at the final 6, obviously that was the round at the double eviction where they almost nominated themselves. If only the rules had allowed it, they would have nominated themselves and gone home. So again, Nick and Phil, very luck dependent winners as well, had to win out, were very terribly strategically towards the end of the game, had some really poor jury management. Really, they did everything wrong. The only reason they're this high is because they were very well positioned for that first 2/3 of the game, and is that they do land this high on the list. Now, number 22, we have another winner that won out, and that's Ian. Now, Ian won out from the final 9, with the exception of the final 4 round, where he gets saved not really due to his own actions, but more so due to Dan not wanting to go to the final 3 with a couple. For a good chunk of that game, he had no clue what was going on. And obviously, Dan targeted him at the final 6. If he hadn't won that veto, he would have gone home. And also, I think Ian had a rocky start. He wasn't really integrating well during those first few weeks. Ian is another pretty luck-dependent winner. A lot of competition wins. A lot of misreads in the game that just end up working out for him. So for me, he lands here at number 22. At number 21, we have the final winner that fully won out, and that is Kevin Martin from BBCAN 5. And Kevin Martin's always a tough one for me to rank because, he won out, which is obviously terrible in terms of positioning because, that means that everyone was going to target him if he didn't win out. However, he pretty much broke the game. I mean, he pretty much broke Big Brother Canada. He memorized the type of competitions that would be done and memorized questions that would be similar to the ones that would be done. And through that was able to essentially almost guarantee that he won every single competition in the end game. And that is so impressive. And Kevin has always been an anomaly to me in Big Brother, where it's like he has so many positive attributes for the game. It's just that he can't execute. I think a positive attribute that you have to give to his game, though, is the fact that he was able to build such a strong bond with William, to the point that William does save him with the veto at the final 9. And if it wasn't for that, Kevin doesn't go on the run that he does. But overall, again, like, he had to win out, which isn't particularly great in my eyes. And even though he won out in a way that he essentially broke the game, it's still winning out, and there's still a chance that he doesn't win those competitions. So for me, he lands here at number 21. Now, number 20, we're at a winner that I always just don't know what to do with either, because again, I think this is another situation where this person is a mediocre player of Big Brother, but they did win in a way where they didn't need to win out. They didn't need twists. So at number 20 here, we have Josh, and I don't feel great about putting Josh this high. Because, I mean, Josh did win to a bitter jury. If you win due to a bitter jury, that's more so due to the actions of the person you're up against. More than likely, you didn't do anything to make that jury bitter against your opponent. Now, you have to credit Josh for knowing that there was a chance that the jury was going to be bitter, and that's why he took Paul to the end. And also, I think you have to give him some credit for his goodbye messages, which did help, I think, especially with Alex, making her more bitter in the jury house. But there's never a point where, like, Paul tells him to do something, he says no. Like, he literally just does everything he says. I think there are points where he's terrible socially. I mean, Josh played what should have been a losing game, but he did end up winning. And again, I do think that win was very luck dependent, but I mean, at least for me, he didn't have to win comps to get to the end. He didn't need twists to get to the end. So because of that, he lands here at number 20. Number 19, we have the final winner from Celebrity Big Brother to make the list, and that is Tamar Braxton. And Tamar, in my opinion, is a better version of Josh. I think she was more assertive in her gameplay. Now, I do think she does terrible jury management along the way. Again, the fact that she was just dancing around when Tom Green gets eliminated is just terrible. And I do think she gets benefited by the fact that this was a celebrity season where they get to watch the season back, and I do think that helps Tamar a lot. But I do think there is just this natural charisma from Tamar that isn't really there with Josh, and that did allow her to win the game unanimously, even getting the votes of some people that were very close allies to Ricky. I do think she manages her relationship with Candy pretty well and is able to get her very close to the end of the game and is get her in a position to where Candy actively roots for her to win the game. The fact that she convinces Ricky to take her to the end is completely ridiculous when Ricky could have easily taken Lolo and more than likely won the game at that point. I do think Tamar misplayed certain parts at the beginning of the game, though. I mean, I think her getting the arguments with Lolo at the beginning of the game aren't particularly great. The fact that she actively made herself the fourth in a 4-person alliance and wanted to ride that out isn't particularly great. But again, she was able to convince Ricky to take her to the end, so I mean, maybe it would have worked out for her anyway. I think a lot of that has to do also with the fact that Lolo was an idiot and turned down Ricky's final 2 deal, but whatever. I mean, like, either way, I think Tamar is essentially a very similar winner to Josh. I think she's slightly better, as again, I think she was a bit more assertive in the game, and also I think she has more of a charisma than Josh did, so for me, she lands here at number 19. Now we're moving on to the middle tier winners for me, and at number 18 here, with the winner BB20, we have Casey. The reason I don't consider her a winner that won out is because Tyler was actively trying to take her to the end as well. I do think she wins due to a flawed jury format, which, I mean, you can also say that, I mean, Tyler should have known about the jury format and played accordingly, which, I mean, he should have. But at the same time, I do think Casey gets benefited by the fact that jury questioning was so short. I think if they were given even like 5 more minutes, I think Tyler wins the game. But Casey was in the majority for most of the game, but again, she wasn't an active member of the majority for a good chunk of the game. I think she gets very lucky with the fact that Tyler chose her as the one to make a final 2 deal with, the one that he's stuck with. And through that, she's able to essentially just coast throughout the entire game. She never really has to do much until the end game. And I think she largely wins due to misconceptions about her game. So again, overall, not a really strong game in my opinion. She lands here at number 18. So now at number 17, we actually have the first time I switched some placements from my original US winner ranking. And I think this is going to be an unpopular one because people were complaining that this guy was already too low on my original list. But at number 17, I have Dr. Will, and I did bump him down 1 spot. And again, this is the thing. Dr. Will is a great player of Big Brother, but his winning game is not that good. I mean, his winning game was one where he actively messes up those first few weeks by being too close with Chilltown, being looked at as the power of the house to the point where a resurgence needs to come together to take them out. He's the last surviving member of that. But even at that point, he's being put on the block almost every week. And you have to give him credit for the final 5 round where he does save himself against Bunky. But outside of that, I do think he plays a pretty mediocre game. And a lot of that also comes to the fact that there was no veto on this season. If there was a veto on this season, I think Will goes home because Will was always the second target. Like, he was never the initial target. And on a game where there's no veto, that's obviously great. But in a game where there's a veto, being the second target is not a good position to be in, because if the initial target gets vetoed off the block, you're more than likely going home. And I think that's the position Will was in so many times. Adding in with the fact if there was a veto at the final 4, 1,000,000,000% Will goes home. Like, if we're talking about a competition between Will, Hardy, and Nicole, I mean, Will's not winning that competition, and Will is going home at that point. So those are the major reasons why I did decide to bump Will down since my last ranking. As again, I think his win just doesn't work on a modern season, so because of that, he lands here at number 17. Now at number 16, we have the player that I bumped up 1 spot above Will, and that is Lisa. The reason why I bumped Lisa up above Will is because I just feel like her position was so much better. She was someone that was very rarely even targeted in the game, especially towards that end game. I mean, the fact that Jason and Danielle decided to take her to the final 3 over Amy is completely asinine. While she wasn't controlling things throughout the game, I think she was just in a very solid position throughout most of the game, even when her allies were getting taken out. So for me, that was enough to place her above Dr. Will. Now at number 15, we have the latest winner to be on the list, the winner that wasn't on my initial US list, and that is Jackson. Now, I really debated what to do with Jackson as well, because I do think there are definitely elements of a win out here with Jackson, where he does need to win a lot of competitions to get to the end. But for me, the main difference between him and like Kevin and Ian is the fact that he wasn't alone. He had Holly with him that could have also helped him out, and also he did have that alliance with Cliff and Nicole that were willing to turn him at points, but he still had that alliance to carry him through a lot of those rounds that he quote-unquote needed to win competitions. So that's a lot of the reason why he's not in that tier. I think he had more control in the game than Lisa and Will. I think he actively made a lot more strategic moves. Now, I think he also probably had more flaws in his game than someone like Lisa. I think he definitely had some mediocre jury management at points. I think there are times where he's just simply not in control and doesn't know what's going on. But again, he does run that end game. I mean, I think the fact that he was able to get Cliff and Nicole to vote out Tommy over Holly is a ridiculous move. And I know people are trying to discredit it, but I still look at that as a very impressive move. Even though I will say I do think he made a mistake to even be in that position to begin with, but whatever. Him convincing Holly to throw the competition at the final 4, I think that was very impressive. He was a major figure within the Majority Alliance very early on, but was also someone that wasn't as targeted as someone like Jack. Now, his game does obviously blow up during the mid-game, but he's able to recover from that pretty well, where obviously he builds those bonds with Cliff and Nicole. He's able to make himself look isolated, which I think was pretty good. Again, obviously compared to Jack, who at that point had Chrissy and Tommy and Annalise. And overall, I feel like Jackson played a very solid game of Big Brother. A lot of highs, a lot of lows, but overall for me, he lands here at number 15. Now at number 14, we have a player that actually moved down quite a bit since my last ranking. And at number 14 here, I have June. And actually, immediately after I made that video, I regretted putting her as high as I did, because I think the problem with June is she only wins that season against Allison. That's literally the only person in the entire season that she wins against. And I don't feel like she does much actively to get herself in that position to where she's in the end against Allison. Because I think Allison herself is a savvy enough player to know that even Allison knew that the only person she could possibly beat was June as well. So I think that sort of realization really made me lower my opinion on June, where it wasn't really June convincing Allison to do something against her best interest, because it was actually also in Allison's best interest to go against June, because those are the only two people that would have a chance against each other there. And I think she treated some of the people there poorly, where some people just simply didn't like her. And even Allison, the person that took her to the final 2, has said that she doesn't like June. And again, it's just like, I feel like those those are flaws that are big enough for me to drop her down a few spots, I think I have to land her here at number 14. Now number 13, from BBCAN 2, we have Jon Pardi. And Jon Pardi was tough for me to rank as well, because there was a point where I really thought about switching his position with the BBCAN player that was ranked above him. Because Jon was someone that was in that majority group during that midsection of the game, and was the person that was looked at as running the game along with Netta, which is technically more dominant than the person we'll be talking about later. However, I think the more and more you analyze Jon's game, though, the more flaws there are within it. Because you do have him being in the majority very early on in the game. However, he does lose that majority. I mean, there is a point where the first 5 are targeting him, and he does get saved by the Canada's HOH twist, where it was during that week that they were planning on targeting Jon, but he's able to have Canada's HOH, which saves him. And to be fair, he does win the veto that week anyway, but it definitely benefits him position-wise for that to happen. And after that, with Heather eventually winning HOH as well, I mean, that group is able to come together, that sloppy seconds, and they're able to run the game from that point forward. But he also loses control at the very end of the game. I mean, at the very end, at the final 5, he loses Adele, one of his closest allies, and clearly goes home if he doesn't win out in those last 2 rounds. His game was definitely flawed there. And also, I think just strategically, I think Netta was the main decision maker with that duo there. I think there's just things that do knock Jon down enough for me to rank him here at number 13. Now, at number 12, we have Paris. And Paris is another kind of weird one, where Paris played a floater game similar to June, but I do think she was better positioned than June, where Paris had people around her. She had Maddie, she had Will, she had that 3-person group that was a centerpiece in the game. She also had alliances with Derek and Kayla. She had a good relationship with Johnny, with Ryan. Like, she had very strong relationships. And like what I talked about with June is that while she was like a floater in the game, I felt like a lot of those relationships weren't as strong as what we have with Paris here. I do think she makes a misstep in saving Kayla at the final 8, though. I mean, again, a lot of that you can credit to Allie just playing terribly, but she does get herself in the position where she needs to win out from the final 4 on, and she does do that. But that is a flaw against her, and I do think overall she was a less dominant winner. I think she had less control in the game than someone like Jon did, but I think her positioning in the game was much stronger than Jon's. And for me, I think that's the reason why I decided to land her here at number 12. I'm moving on to number 11. And from this point, for a while, we have nothing but BBUS winners. So we'll kind of rush through these a bit. At number 11 here, we have Steve. I've talked about this before. I think Steve is a pretty underrated player of Big Brother. He's someone that had a plan from before the season and came in and enacted it pretty perfectly. I do think he positioned himself in the game pretty well, where he was rarely the biggest target in the game. He was rarely the main target in the game. I think he knew when was the right time to cut people. And while he wasn't really given the opportunity to do that with Vanessa until the very, very end, he at least was willing to pull the trigger on that move. That's really what clinches him the game. So for me, Steve lands here at number 11. Now number 10, and number 10 is the last change on the list. I mean, the last one that switched placements from where they were in the original list. And at number 10 here, I have Adam. Adam's another one that a lot of people discredit his game, but I think Adam, when you look back at his game, especially his end game, I think it's one of the strongest end games in the history of Big Brother. He does get off to a rocky start. I do think he makes some comments that aren't great, and within the game, he does start to mellow out in the mid game, and I think from that point on, he plays extremely dominantly. I mean, he's in the majority alliance, a center figure within the majority alliance. From the jury phase on, I do think one of the things that is his weak spot, though, is James. I do think the fact that he votes James back into the house isn't great. And the fact that he also gives James a chance to not be on the block at the final 6 is completely asinine, as again, it just builds up so much possibility of James winning the veto and through that sending one of his own alliance members home. That's not great. But even with all that, his positioning was very strong. Like, we get to the final 5 where I do think, even though he does it a bit too blatantly, he does do a very good job at managing Natalie's jury vote. At the final 4, he makes Ryan do something that's completely against his best interest in voting out Sharon, which completely ruins Ryan's game. And then at the final 3, he gets Ryan to do his dirty work in voting out Sheila. I do think he plays that endgame extremely well, and while he does have flaws, I felt like those strong points were stronger than June and Steve's, and that's why I did bump him up a bit here. So for me, he lands here at number 10. Now at number 9, we have kind of your prototypical winner of Big Brother. I think this type of person's always going to do well on a season, and that is Drew. And kind of your generic, likable guy. I mean, a guy that wins a lot of competitions, a guy that's strategically savvy enough, a guy that's very social. I mean, I think Drew is kind of your prototypical Big Brother player. I think his winning game was pretty solid, and he is able to get Diane to save him at the final 5. He's able to get Cowboy to make a decision that's completely against his best interest in voting out Nokomis at the final 4. At the final 3, he's cutthroat enough to vote out Diane. I mean, I think he's a very strong player. But the reason why he's not higher on the list is because I don't feel like he really takes the reins in the game until those last few rounds in the game. I think before that he kind of is just in the background, and I mean that's fine. But again, when on a winner ranking here of ranking the winning players' games, in comparison to other games, he wasn't out in front for as long as these other players. So for me, he lands here at number 9. At number 8, we have a winner that, again, is another controversial one that she's this high. But for me, I do have Nicole. I think she did a very good job at positioning on that season. I do think she has some faults. I mean, she was obviously on the outs during Poly Boot Week and kind of came off as too, snaky earlier on. But overall, she was a centerpiece in that majority alliance from very early on in the game. I think her move after the Poly week to turn Natalie and Michelle against Paul is masterful gameplay. I think that is really her best move of the season, and I mean, if it wasn't for that move there, that new majority that built there would have probably stuck together. And again, they knew when to turn on Victor and Paul. She had Corey as a shield at the final 4. I mean, I do think her game is overall pretty impressive. I do have faults in her wanting to take Paul to the end because, again, that's a much harder road than taking James. But I mean, overall, though, I do look at Nicole as a pretty strong player. Big Brother, she lands here at number 8. Now, number 7, we have Mike Boogie. And the thing about Mike Boogie is I think he has some flaws. I mean, obviously, I think early on in the game, I don't think they had much control at all. I think at the end of the game, they completely lost control by really messing up that final 4 round and allowing Erica to turn Nell against Will, and that's not great. And to the point where coming into the final 3 round, it looks like he's dead in the water, though obviously he does save himself. Those parts aren't great, but he does play that middle section of the game pretty well, pretty much running the game along with Dr. Will. And I know a lot of people give more credit to Dr. Will and say that Boogie could have only done it because of Dr. Will, but I think there were actually points where Boogie had the better state of mind on what to do than Will, where I think Will didn't really care about what was going on in Big Brother All-Stars. I don't think he was trying to win the game. I think he was just trying to have fun at that point and get Boogie for as far as he could have. But again, Boogie, strong player, has faults in his game, lands here at number 7. At number 6, I know people were upset at this, I have Dan Giesling. I'm not saying Dan is the number 6 player of all time. I mean, just watch my top 10 player of all time video. But I think Dan's winning game had some faults. Again, I think the fact that he was out of the majority for that first, 3 or 4 rounds of the game. Now, what he did when being in that minority, I do think is pretty strong. I do think he was able to lower his threat level in a way that was very impressive, in a way that we hadn't really seen on Big Brother up until this point. He continued to stay loyal to Brian to show other people that he was loyal, and I think those are things that are impressive. Again, he was steps ahead of other players, but at the same time, again, he simply just wasn't in the majority early on, and also later on in the game. He does need to be saved at the final 5 with Memphis winning the veto there, because if it wasn't for that, one of Memphis or Dan would have gone home and he would have been in a much worse position. And it wasn't really until the final 7 or so that he really becomes a big decision maker and how the game is going to be run. So overall, again, I think Dan is a great player. He played a great game. His jury management is next level on this season, but he has some flaws. So for me, he lands here at number 6. Now, number 5, we have, again, another one of these prototypical Big Brother players. And number 5, I have Hayden. I think Hayden, again, played a very dominant game, was part of the Brigade Alliance. While I do think there were other members, namely Matt, that were the mastermind of the Brigade, Hayden obviously was one of the ones that came up with the idea of blindsiding Matt. And then once that happens, I do think they're able to run the table. And I think Hayden was always the best position to win the game out of those remaining 3. He won a whole bunch of competitions, but never actually needed them. He had a good mind for the game. He was very good socially. I think overall, very solid game of Big Brother. I am kind of perturbed by the fact that he only won in a 4-3 vote. But outside of that, a strong game, lands here at number 5. Now, number 4, we have another one of the more dominant games of the history of Big Brother. We have Maggie. Again, the way that Maggie put together her cult of the friendship is just incredible. It's just mind-blowing that she was able to use Eric as a way to pull in all of people in order to do whatever she wanted, using Eric's memory to manipulate people. I think that's very strong gameplay. I do think she mishandled certain members of the jury, and I do think there is a chance that she loses that season. I mean, obviously, she only won in a 4-3 vote, and there are those rumors out there that Howie voted incorrectly. But I do think that is a knock, though, that those Sovereign 6 people were just so anti-Maggie. I mean, when you're at the point where you have people that are that vitriolic against you, I do think that is a knock against your game, even though you were extremely dominant throughout the rest of the season. So for me, again, I think she played a strong game. I just think other people played better. So for me, she lands here at number 4. Now at number 3, we have Andy. Was able to dominate the game from behind the scenes for a good chunk of it. He was the decision maker for a lot of big moves. Orchestrated the Nick blindside. He was one of the first people to mention the Judd blindside. He was able to obviously pull together the exterminators in the end game, and from that point pretty much just run the table. Knew when the right time to blindside Amanda was, knew when the right time to get out Helen, knew how to get Alyssa to pretty much take all the blame for a lot of the moves that he was doing and get her out immediately afterwards. I think Andy played an incredible game of Big Brother, but the reason why he's not number 1 or 2 on the list is because, again, while he dominated the game, he did it from the background. The next 2 people that we talk about dominated the game out in front and still weren't taken out, I think is even more impressive to me. So for me, Andy lands here at number 3. Now we're at the final 2, the top 2 winners in North American history. And I mean, it should be pretty clear who those 2 are, right? I mean, there's 1 US winner and 1 BBCAN winner. And I did debate over this for a little while, but for me, it was pretty clear that number 2 had to be Dane, the winner of BBCAN 7. Again, Dane played an extremely dominant game. I mean, very similar to Hayden, was part of an all-male group in the Pretty Boys and was a major central figure of that group. I think unlike Hayden, I think Dane was definitely more of a decision maker within that group than Hayden was. I think it really was Dane and Anthony that were the centerpiece of the house. I mean, Dane was in such a great position to where even if he gets nominated at any point, he's never going home because of the amount of allies that he had. You see, 100% had Damien, Esty, Kiki. He 100% had Adam. He 100% had Anthony. And there's just no way he was going home under any circumstance. Now, I do think he got rid of some of his allies a bit too early. I mean, I do think he was too willing to throw Damien and Esty under the bus towards the end game. And that put him in the position where a lot of his buffers were gone at the final 5. And at the point where Anthony looked like he was about to turn on Dane, I mean, Dane could have gone home there, though. I think you have to give credit to Dane that he was able to flip Anthony back to his side, and from that point on, they completely run the table. I mean, Dane wins so many competitions on that season, but again, he never needed to win a competition. He was never in the position where a competition saved him. Even at the final 3, Anthony was planning on taking Dane to the end, and even Kira considered taking Dane to the end. So I think Dane played an extremely dominant game. He does have knocks against him, so for me, he lands here at number 2. Now, number 1, I mean, it's pretty obvious. Number 1's Derek. I mean, there's really no question. I mean, Derek played easily the most dominant game in the history of Big Brother, where he was in control pretty much from the very beginning. I mean, while he didn't have direct control in week 1, he was part of the majority group that was making the decisions. Week 2, he flips the vote to save Zach. Week 3, he's HOH and leads the charge to get rid of Devin. And from that point on, he's a central piece in the house the entire way through. He leads that bomb squad group throughout the rest of the entire game while still avoiding being targeted. And even if he had been targeted, he was, again, in the position similar to Dane where, like, no one was voting him out. He was in a position where he had so many allies that wanted to keep him around that he was never going home. Now, he was benefited by Team America that made Donnie and Frankie probably want to keep him around longer than normal, but he still completely runs that season without really any difficulty. And the fact that he was able to convince Cody to take him to the end over Victoria is still completely mind-blowing at this point. I do think he mismanages Donnie coming into the jury, but outside of that, I can't think of a single flaw in his game from his end. So for me, I think Derek clearly has to be the number 1 winner of all time for North American Big Brother up to this point. But there we go. Those are my winner rankings for North American Big Brother. This took way too long. I really did not plan on this taking this long, but that's the video. Thank you for watching.